The winding road of aging gracefully brings us to 1985 and Stephen King's Silver Bullet. Before I was ever afraid of nightmares or Crystal Lake or little foul-mouthed ginger dolls chasing me around with stumpy legs, Dracula and Frankenstein's monster, and especially the Wolfman, kept me up at night. And when I found out back in 1985 that Corey Haim was teaming with the bad guy from Lethal Weapon 1 in a Stephen King movie about werewolves, I was all too happy to part with my parents' money. This brings us to a full moon, a silver bullet. Let's get after this one. An instantly good feeling sets in when I see that snow-capped Paramount Pictures logo, because it takes me back to Friday the 13th, the anticipation of a new Jason Voorhees movie. Whenever you saw that logo, you just knew you were in it for a good horror evening. It's spring of 1976, and we find ourselves in a railroad tracks in the middle of the night with a guy who's had one too many having to work the tracks. He's not happy he's there that time of night, and he has an onlooker. He has a fan admiring him. This brings us to our very first kill. We're barely a minute into this movie, and it's a gory one. Now, the movie is set in Tarker's Mills, which is a sleepy but community-driven town, and we arrive at a spring festival in the middle of town square. Our narrator is a young woman that we find out is Jane Coslow, who we meet as a teenage girl. Her brother Marty is confined to a wheelchair. He's perfectly played by Corey Haim, who in the 80s, that's his wheelhouse. Rest in peace, Corey Haim. He was tremendous here. And you feel bad for Marty because he's a young, vibrant kid who's stuck in a chair. We meet his buddy Brady, and Marty and Brady play a prank on Janie that she's not too fond of. You know, she's a teenage girl. She's real proud of the way she looks, and they do something that ends up with her in a mud pit. So big sister's not happy with little brother, but the chemistry between the two in this movie is tremendous. She's always looking out after her brother. Maybe she feels like it's part of her duty as the older sister. Maybe it's something the parents put on her unfairly. Now, one thing we have no shortage of is carnage candy in this movie. They are not shy about the body count. We get the guy by the railroad tracks, and then we wind up with another full moon, and we meet a young woman in her upstairs bedroom who's very sad. She's unhappy with her life, and she's thinking about taking it. And then we get somebody diving through the window, all too happy to volunteer for the task. After that, we meet this mean, drunk... He's got a little blonde girl that's his daughter. Marty was putting the full court press on her on the way back from school, which I got to respect Marty for the attempt. But this guy is a mean guy, and he hears a noise in a greenhouse next door, goes to investigate. No more mean guy. With it being such a small town, and this not being the type of place that these sorts of deaths happen in, everybody takes notice. And at a tavern, which all good ideas are born at a tavern, everybody decides local law is not doing enough. They need to start looking at taking matters into their own hands. This is where we get to the really great stuff. We meet Marty's Uncle Red. He's played by 80s powerhouse and sometimes scourge of the 2000s, Gary Busey. This guy's throwing around dad jokes like only a foul-mouthed uncle can. He's putting a mean hurting on a fifth of wild turkey, and he's just having a good time with his nephew. Gary Busey is a delight in this movie. Every scene he's in, he's fantastic, and you can tell Red loves his nephew. He feels terrible about his nephew's circumstances, and he wants to just treat him like a normal kid. His mom and dad fawn over him like a broken bird. Red just wants to be his buddy. He just wants to make sure he's smiling and having a good time. So when Marty's friend Brady gets killed by this thing, that's when the town decides enough is enough. And it's on the way back from Brady's funeral that Marty's riding with Red, and he floats the idea that maybe this isn't a man doing all this killing, but perhaps it's a wolf. Red considers it for a second, doesn't give him much thought past that. The militia, though, that's forming at this tavern, they decide to set out and find this killer. They wind up in the woods, thick fog, up to about chest high, and it's a pretty tense scene. We get a little levity because there's an old woman who looks at an old man who's trembling at the idea of continuing into this fog. And she asks him if he's going to make lemonade in his pants, which I had never heard before. And before I rewatched it, I had forgotten about it. Well, that's going to stick with me forever. I'm going to steal it, and I'm going to use it from this day until my last day. They soon realize with a low growl that something's under that fog with them. This growling intensifies, and one by one, these people start getting picked off. You see that furry clawed hand come up and grab them and bring them down. One guy gets thrown up against the tree. The old tavern owner brings his baseball bat out to play, and the wolf decides to take that and beat him to death with it, which is pretty cruel if you think about it. The guy's a wolf already, and he's using an inanimate object to beat a poor old man to death. I mean, come on, Stephen King. The swerve here, though, is that once the scene's over with, we're back at a funeral. And we're back at a funeral with several caskets lined up in front of a reverend and all the townspeople. And the reverend's talking, trying to comfort these people. But the people start growling and shooting mean looks at the reverend, giving them their angry eyes. And before the reverend knows what's going on, everybody starts to transform into a wolf. And then, boom, reverend wakes up in a cold sweat. I wonder why this guy could be dreaming about such a thing.
Reverend, he was torn apart!
This is where the town gets a curfew and things start being canceled, such as the fireworks show that Marty was looking forward to. I popped for the scene where Marty gets the silver bullet. Now, for those of you who haven't seen the movie, the silver bullet is something Red created for his nephew. It's a combination of a motorcycle and a wheelchair. And you just love that for Marty. You know, it's bad enough that he's got to be in a chair for his whole life, presumably. You might as well be in a chair with some serious style and some serious horsepower. On top of all of that, Red gives his nephew a big bag of fireworks because the fireworks show was canceled. Red's only condition, though, is stay close to the house. With everything going on, Marty, please stay close to the house. Now, for those of you that have seen this film, how impressive was it that Marty was able to climb out of his bedroom window, scale down the side of his house, climb into the silver bullet with the fireworks, and motor away? Unbelievable upper body strength. Now this kid settles on a bridge over a small body of water and starts shooting off his fireworks into the night sky, and he's having a blast. But the lighting of the night sky attracts the attention of our furry friend who decides to descend upon Marty. Now the part where that wolf starts to come after Marty on the bridge still creeps me out to this day. Yes, the kid is in a wheelchair. It's a souped up wheelchair, but it's a wheelchair nonetheless. What if this thing doesn't start? What if he punctures a tire on a loose nail in the bridge? There's a lot of things that can go wrong here, and I give Marty all the credit in the world. I probably would have made lemonade in my pants at that time. Marty has the presence of mind to shoot this thing in the eye with a rocket. I mean, good for you, kid. And he motors out of there. Marty hauls ass back home, upper body strength engages, back up to his bedroom, probably didn't sleep a wink that night. The phone call to Red the next morning from Marty does not go over well with Red. Marty needs somebody on his side, though, so he levels with Jane, tells her what happened, and Jane, being the amazing big sister, decides to believe him. Now, they devise a plan where Jane is going to go out the next day under the guise of collecting for a can drive, and she is going to look at every town resident. Reason being, Marty shot this thing in the eye, and if this is a wolf born from a human, that human has got to have some sort of an injury. Jane is going from house to house. She goes to the barbershop. She goes to the diner. She's looking for anybody that might have a heavily bandaged left eye. Doesn't find anybody. Starts to curse herself for even believing that snotty little brother of hers. Goes to the church to drop off all the cans from the can drive and is confronted by the reverend, who happens to have his left eye shot out. So that's why he had that dream. They make another run at Red, and as cool as Red is, he's still not buying it. So Marty and Jane devise a plan where they're going to send this guy letters, ransom-style letters, where you cut out the numbers and the letters and you paste them all together. This letter says, we know who you are, we know what you are, why don't you go ahead and kill yourself? Now, that's a bold strategy, Cotton, and I don't think it's going to pay off for him in the end. Then we get this heartbreaker of a scene where Marty is sitting there by a baseball diamond watching all these other kids his age play baseball. He's watching them run around. He's watching them bat. He's watching them jump up in the air and catch these balls. And you just hate that. You feel that for Marty. Not quite as much as the fear you feel for Marty when you see the Reverend's car slowly start to come into picture. I have to tell you, I thought it was an extremely bold move what the Reverend did when he tried to mow Marty down in his car in broad daylight. Now, Marty's able to put a little distance between himself and that Reverend, but he decides to take a turn onto an abandoned bridge. He winds up getting stuck on this bridge, and that's when the Reverend finds him, slowly walks towards him in this dark bridge. Everything feels bleak for Marty in that moment because he can't get away. He can't get up and run. He's got nowhere to go. Thankfully, for Marty's sake and for my sake as a 5-year-old watching this movie, Marty winds up getting away. They try once more with Red because they have to have an adult on their side. He is perplexed at how persistent they are with this story. until he looks at the silver bullet and the dent in the fender and the paint that's on the dent in the fender, realizing that the paint belongs to the car that belongs to the Reverend. Everything starts falling into place. Red starts to get on board. And when nobody else will believe him, when Red tries the police and they won't believe him, and then the police officer goes missing that goes to investigate it, that's when we get a great scene, Marty and Jane handing over their silver jewelry to Red, asking him, please make us a silver bullet. Phenomenal ending that happens on a full moon, on Halloween night no less. The cast here is great. Practical effects are awesome. It's a scary movie. It's a heartwarming movie all at the same time. I love this one each and every time I watch it, just a little more every time. Corey Haim, rest in peace. Gary Busey was tremendous. Everybody played their role really well. This one ages gracefully. It always will. It's 9 out of 10 for me. It's my favorite Stephen King movie. I think you should always make a habit of watching this on or around Halloween. If you want to be scared, if you want to watch a good old school 80s horror film, look no further than 1985 Silver Bullet. That being said, this is Aging Gracefully. I am Matthew Essex. I'll see you at the next full moon and on the other side.